Whoops. I'll wait for others. Kelsey, I think you had a really good interpretation though. I'm really excited to work on that. The seam between walk and, but also I think you've uncovered a need for a feature that I'll reiterate when others join the call. But just for us to be able to categorize different runs or walks to say, hey, this came from, this is the list of 25,000 pages that web monitoring currently monitors. And that's one sort of category of thing. And then we would maybe want to do environmental impact assessment as like a separate thing. Does that make sense? Should I repeat that?
I guess I also actually have questions about how walk can, or if it even should, serve any of the EIS type needs.
Oh yeah, sorry. If you don't mind, I think we should table EIS. I'm totally going to just bully this conversation so we can move things forward as quickly as possible.
Well, I think it's a good, we should try and come back to it though, because I think it's a good straw man for like what things walk should or shouldn't be able to accomplish.
Completely agreed. Yeah. So maybe we table that. I want to get through two things really quick. I want to talk, I want to put the agenda up. I want to talk about the roadmap to integration between, it's like just a test case between walk and scanner. Can we like actually plot out what would be required to sort of get there? And can we turn that into a milestone on walk-in so that we just start chipping away at it? Based on conversations that we've been having, Rob, I think we want to just see that like proof of concept emerge. Like, you know, it's like you're both digging a tunnel from either side and you just want to see the hand poke through. And then we can think about whether it's actually meeting needs or not. The other side of this, I think, is worth describing is the sort of other side of walk that maybe is actually better as an archiving conversation, but just what different types of categories or types of walks we want to be doing. The way I think it intersects with this group is just like, do we need that as like part of this minimum viable sort of like test case? And, or can we just say, right now, we're just going to focus on the list that you guys have already, and we're just going to use that. And then we'll think about adding a feature that allows us to do separate runs. Or is that actually a blocking thing that we should have some way to discretize different walks?
I think some way to discretize different walks is useful regardless. I would like to actually hear input from other people as to whether the current scanner use is the right first implementation milestone use case thing. From the like web monitoring side of the house, the two big needs we have, the two big short-term needs we have out of walk are to fulfill the current scanner use case better than all our other data sources do, and to generate sitemaps for the research team to be able to do larger scale analyses about things like islanding and other stuff. That doesn't and won't in the short or medium term ever feed into the scanner side of web monitoring. And so even if like web monitoring, because it's a current operationalized thing, is a good like first use case, which of those is the one to focus on is a useful question. You know, if we're trying to feed into scanner, is a good way to get like really active high pressure feedback. But it is higher pressure in a certain way. We have to be super careful about like, okay, like if we're not super certain where data is stored and all this other stuff, like there are like more questions that have to be answered more cleanly for it to work, or we have to like find ways to put in walls or like have it feed into the staging environment only, or like there's more questions to answer there because it's like a highly operationalized thing that people are actively using. And it has different needs, right? It has different things that we need to solve first if we're doing that than things that we need to solve first if we're doing the like site mapping for larger scale research team analysis.
Thoughts, others?
I'm trying to think about how to pull those projects apart. So my understanding is I get the research team site mapping thing uh, as its own thing. They don't really have any tooling for that now, as far as I know, right? Lots of ad hoc stuff. Okay, and then the other thing is a better data source. And a question I have there is, what's the current feeling? I guess mainly from you, Rob, because you monitor most of the stuff. About how much of a step backward it's going to be if we unplug Versionista. Sorry.
At current,
Yeah.
like, I would not want to unplug Versionista today.
Okay.
The farther I get into Internet Archive importing,
Yeah.
the less great I feel about it. We'll get there to a place where it's workable, assuming I stop spending all my time fighting fires and have time to actually work on it. I feel confident that it could be something that works reasonably well by the end of the month, hopefully before, but I'll put the end of the month as the date. But even then, my feel on it is that it's not going to be a thing that I'm going to feel a whole lot better about than I feel about Versionista.
Versionista has been more reliable, right? I mean, their scraping might be giving us a worse API, as in no API. So
Yeah.
in the sense that they could break at any time with no warning, that's worse. They're not a partner in as good of a sense as IA is. But the fact that IA can just like lose us for 3 days is very disruptive to our operations. So
Yeah, so like there's different pros and cons for each. The things that I'm unhappy about Internet Archive are largely divergent from the things I'm unhappy about Versionista. That is a mostly non-intersecting set. And you're right. In terms of reliability, Versionista has been way more reliable than Internet Archive. Further, all the data that Versionista has is data that we can actually retrieve versus Internet Archive. No matter how good we do, we face the fact that 20 to 40% of the data that Internet Archive has, they will never be able to give us.
Yeah.
We just simply cannot retrieve it, no matter how good we do our side of the equation.
So with all that context on the table, I think some of which has been discussed before and some of which maybe it hasn't, I think there's a pretty strong case that owning our own scraper just to plug into our existing operations is going to free up a ton of dev and maintenance time for other stuff, and that is a higher priority than any of the new stuff like the site mapping. That's my personal take.
That lines up with my gut check on whenever I think about, the last week of December, assuming that there is no Versionista. Yeah, like I feel like, considering that things can break and re-break, and only having one data source with that track record doesn't feel awesome.
I also, in that vein, the thing that has been frustrating to me always since we knew we had to do it, but weirdly, even more so now that we have done writing our own health check tools for Internet Archive, the fact that like we're effectively doing their monitoring for them, like that's always been this is not great, but it weirdly bothers me now that we actually have it working than it did when it was like we really need to do their monitoring for them because they're not doing it well.
Like, hey guys, do you want to count on our Sentry account to monitor your own tool, or?
Yeah, like having it now and seeing the frequency within, like we've had it only operational for like a month and a half or 2 months, and having like 2 major half week to week long like data failures in that period that we had to inform them of is like super scary.
Yeah, I would add one thing to this. Knowing when you have a complete sitemap is really hard. And that's, I've been working on the sitemap code for a while, and there's a lot of edge cases and there's a lot of baseline analysis that is really helpful. The fact that the list of URLs is discrete and we know, go hit this set, create a batch, write some code that jams it into a bucket labeled by ISO date. Dope. Like that's, obviously there's exception cases and weirdness and stuff to that, but like, I think sketching, to me, it feels easier, a more, Rob, as you were describing it, you were much closer to concrete definitions of like, these are the requirements. Mm-hmm. They're tall and they're operationalized. I have no problem with that. And I think that if we had the aim of getting into staging and like, hey, can we get this thing to work in your staging environment, which dovetails nicely with the operations work you guys have been doing, I think would be a really nice chance for us to sort of like meet and test, play. Okay, cool. How does this feel? But it's also just like, there's a acute risk that I know that one of the great things about the web monitoring project is you have integrity. You don't just like jump to conclusions and say like, oh, this is a, hair on fire change to some website. And for us to then, if you're ever, I'm very nervous about making sure that we are handing as complete as reasonable sitemaps when analysis on sitemaps begins. And so I don't want to start saying that, like, have publications come out that say, oh, there were 247 inbound links to this climate change page and now there's 0. And like, we realized that we accidentally missed like 400 or something. And so that to me is a really, like, it's going to take time and methodical work to make sure that we're generating accurate and complete sitemaps. There's this company out there, they're called Alphabet Inc. They spend a lot of money on this problem.
Never heard
of it. So like, yeah, I think we got to be really careful about that. It's something that I want to approach a little slower. And on the archiving side, we want to sort of balance that against our EIS work. And so I think there's like, I honestly think that it's a shorter and closer and better bang for the buck reward to try and get some like first site, not sitemap, but instead archives of web pages.
As a side note, not to lose track of, I don't think we want to do this in staging. I think we probably want to spin up a separate cluster so that we can wreak havoc with that and then make sure it works first.
By staging, I mean not production and not
even staging. Like I don't think we should deploy to staging something that is a log protocol.
It's an experiment. Yeah, absolutely agreed. Just I want to stay away from the productionalized requirements, but have them as the bar.
Yeah, I should say, like on the staging, production, whatever side, I have a thought in my head that is that walk should probably not live inside the web monitoring cluster, partially because doing it well at even a small scale like ours requires like some distributed support, and because it's still super speculative, like I would want to keep it isolated, but also because we foresee a possible future there where it is its own public service, not just a part of web monitoring that like maybe other organizations could use, whether for pay or for free or whatever, but that like it might be its own public service, and therefore like you probably want to have its own deployment and cluster and management. That's like the thought that's been in the back of my head there. When I said production versus staging, I meant which of our web monitoring, which of our scanner environments basically is pulling data from it.
Is consuming the API.
Yes.
That we're putting up. Absolutely agreed. I think I personally, just to throw it on the table, I think this is like an archiving working group gig, and it's our job to go figure out and like spend whatever AWS credits we need and like have to like kind of figure this out. And that's something that Kelsey, Kevin, and I can sort of chat through how that would work. I think that's why I want to talk. I think the conversation we should have today is like, what does that integration look like? Let's go to the same page that we all agree these are API calls, some sort of static resources. And that's something that we should sort of sort out. And I'd love to sort of get that conversation going where it is like that discretized list of these are the requirements. This is what it takes to be a drop-in replacement for Versionista. And not by drop-in, but like, okay, we're going to do this on web monitoring to make sure that we can consume this API, but let's RFC out the contract for how that API should look and feel, and make sure that and then on our side, we'll have something we can actually discuss and like make sure it works. But I absolutely think this should be like an API thing.
Cool.
Unless Kelsey or Kevin, unless you want to interject and think that that's a terrible idea, but.
I'm honestly still so lost. I'm like following this and trying to piece together the parts that I'm pulling out, and you can see my effectively mind map at the bottom of the notes. I'm trying to outline what the parts of this project are, like parts of this make complete sense and other parts are like, I just don't know what we currently use. Is there a doc that just says what we do? Because that would really help me a lot in terms of understanding what we're trying to change. Because I'm still like backfilling problem statements and like what are the features lists and why.
When you say we, oh yeah.
Dude, I think Jason and I were going to ask the same question. Sorry. So just when you say what we use, you mean what Scanner uses, or?
So far I've heard we have Scanner, we have Versionista. My impression is Scanner is replacing Versionista, if possible, in order to do diffing and also some of the scraping, but Walk is replacing some of that scraping capability. And then separately, there's a monitoring of, I assume it's uptime on Internet Archive's reliability of scraping. Something like that.
We're bad at our jobs.
So Scanner, so part of the problem is like we don't ever talk about Scanner in any of the like docs or anything else. Scanner is really just like the friendly like product-y name for like the web archiving service, or not web monitoring service as a whole. So like the whole stack of like if an analyst is they get a spreadsheet every week and then they look at pages at monitoring.envirodata.gov.org to see their changes, like that is Scanner. To the degree that like that requires inputs from a foreign data source, whether it be Internet Archive or PageFreezer or Versionista, those are part of Scanner, but really they're a separate underlying service that Scanner depends on. Walk, at least in the short term, if not the medium term, would only be, from the Scanner perspective, another one of those. And so it's useful to think of like Walk as just its own separate service that is doing the same job that Internet Archive is doing, or that Versionista has been doing in the context of Scanner.
Specifically, which is taking a list of URLs and scraping it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of where we plug in, is we just become another one of those assets that Scanner, the stack of analysis, consumes.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, a lot of people asked us, why not just make your own scraper? And we thought, no, surely not. No, that would be way too much work. And now we realize that using a tool is actually worse.
Yeah, we were like, we don't want to monitor that and have to make it robust.
Yeah.
Do all these things that we're now doing for other people.
Right. Right.
Instead of for ourselves.
Right. Though who would have believed us if we hadn't tried to integrate with IA first, as I've said before. So.
Yeah, and I think we should also be clear, also, so it's recorded for posterity, that like it's not like IA is a terrible service, and it's not like we necessarily want to throw it away, because at the very least, it's still super valuable for historical data. We'll never be able to like go back in time and recollect things, and it's also useful as in the like distributed collaborative data sense, another store of this kind of information that is already a reliable and trusted source. So being able to combine that with other things we have and being able to use it in our analysts' analyses is still like a super important thing from a broader perspective of like what it means to have data from who and where, and its provenance, and the trust that the public or other organizations reading our reports might have in it. And especially like as we start to get this up and running, seeing how it aligns or doesn't align with the type of data we get out of Internet Archive is another useful way to say, here is a good measure of this is working well, here is a good measure of this is equally trustworthy, etc.
So we would still want to feed our scraped stuff into the Internet Archive.
I think that is one of the crazier ideas we've had around this is that if one of the outputs was work files, that is a thing that Internet Archive can consume and add to its own archives. And it would be really rad if we could take over the load of operationalizing consistent, good metadata scrapes of the stuff we care about, and then give that to the Internet Archive to also be another host of it long term for the public. I think we would also like to host it for the public, and we would ultimately like to store it in some sort of distributed web type thing, so that the public can get it that way too. But if Internet Archive were interested, which we haven't even really explored deeply or had talks with them about, that would be super awesome. And if we could walk in a way that made that easy to do, good times, good stuff.
Yeah, and we've roadmapped that in now. So I know how to do that. If I had infinite time, we would do it. And we've had conversations with people at the IA to know how that would look. And so some of them have vetted some of the code that we would be using in that case. And some of that code is written. And so it's there. And it's like a roadmapable thing, and everything that we're doing today would feed into that eventual goal if we wanted to get there.
I assume that we will be scraping fewer sites more often than they care about, or maybe because we've identified them as interesting to us, they're worth the extra storage for them. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, I think with the IA sort of wandering into IPFS and DATland, there's a whole conversation here. And it's archives. This is in a larger part of the broader conversation of doing more with archives and deduplicating efforts across organizations. And can we actually leverage the technologies to encourage organizational alignment here? And so, yeah, I think it totally makes sense. Go ahead, Rob.
Now I'm losing track of what it was I want to say. There's a related note in there, which is, I put this in your product requirements doc, Kelsey. But so a big part of what that means is being able to export the data in a work format. But I don't know if that means that's the canonical way we want to store it for ourselves, because one of the things in my head that is super rad about this is that, especially if we can do the actual scraping with a headless Chrome or some other automated browser, that gives us an avenue to do some really crazy useful metadata that, so far as I'm aware, there's not a reasonable way to put into a work. And so shipping out works would necessarily mean some filtering out of some additional useful data, right? So as an example, being able to, normally the core thing we care about is you snapshotted a web page. Here is the raw HTML as we received it from a server, and here's its hash, great. But hey, wouldn't it be awesome, because we loaded it in a headless browser, to be able to say, also, here is the raw data of what that page looked like after it was loaded, and all its related resources came in, and scripts did all the things they were going to do. Here's what the page actually looks like at the end of the day when it's loaded in a user's browser, and hash that. Or to say, here's what the page looks like when we replace all the links in it with the hashes of the sub-resources that link went to, so that you have a better sense of this page as it is unique, not just the page itself, but the page and all the resources it depends on, right? And this is all stuff that's hard to do after the fact, but really easy to do if you have control over the thing that's doing the snapshotting. And so I have a boatload of crazy ideas in that vein that I would love to be able to do here. And we can only really do those if we're in control of the actual snapshotting. And that also means having extra data to store that probably won't ever fit in a reasonable way into a work. Although Brendan knows a whole lot more about work than I do, and can make it better.
Can I correct you on that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, everything we're capturing should be expressible as a work.
Okay.
But we don't want to be beholden to the work format. Just bare minimum storing in CBOR, which we're currently using as WAC, and being able to do a conversion from CBOR to, and the biggest thing that Scanner really wants, and has been an active sort of issue, is just the raw HTML. Please don't rewrite the URLs. Please don't change anything. Just give me the response from the server, which is actually not what a lot of crawling services do, because crawling is often trying to, or archiving is trying to create an encapsulated version of that page. that is sort of self-referential. And that means you have to rewrite links. So we've written tools to generate works, to rewrite links, and to store works in this, to store page responses in a CBOR format. So with those three things combined, mean we can store in a format that we like. We can do everything Rob just described, and we can facilitate a conversion to a work format that the IA will then understand. The work format itself does support all of the type of arbitrary metadata that we want to include, so we can actually include it, but it would be smarter for us to store it in CBOR just purely for data purposes, like because it will be smaller than it would be if we stored it in, and that's actually money on the table, right? Like if we store, CBOR on average is giving us like an 11 to 25% savings in terms of space, and that means smaller S3 bill. So yeah, all of the above, good.
Yeah, and that's an even bigger deal as we get this working well and move from a set list of 30,000-ish URLs to like, can we just do all of UPA.gov?
Yeah. And so with that in mind, if you guys don't mind, what I'd love to do is I really want to keep this conversation moving. And I want to make a point of like, particularly on the archiving side, we're like really starting to settle it around refinement to our EIS project and WOC. And one of the things we need to prove to the rest of our working group is that we can sort of maintain both of these projects and sort of put some momentum forward on them. What I'd love to do is just like out of this, if we can get an issue filed that says like, this is how we can get to, this would be the requirements for getting this to work with the scanner stack, and like what you guys would want, just blue field it, and let's get a discussion going there where we can understand that. And then we will focus really hard on defining some incremental sort of goals toward that and start shipping against that. That way we have because it's actually quite helpful that you have a very concrete set of requirements, even if they're operationalized, like and high pressure, because it's concrete. and that's really valuable right now as we're trying to understand this. I've already worked out how we keep this flexible. That's not my concern. It's getting some like deliverables that I'm more concerned about. Does that jive with what others think? And can we have that as an action item, or just like starting to define this as a group?
Yes, I am pro implementing software. Implementations are good, except when they're not.
Which is implemented.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to say earlier, but that other more important things came in is that sounds great, and thank you for framing it that way, because it hadn't really occurred to me that the problems inherent in the mapping needs were that much more speculative than the ones in the like monitoring needs. So the framing that around how concrete those issues are that's a really like meaningful way to go one direction than the reason to go one direction than the other, I think. So thank you.
So can somebody drop a link to this requirements doc that's been referenced?
Kelsey, do you have one of those?
Thank you.
The WOC PRD, right? That is the
Yeah, I think so.
That's the only one we've mentioned.
Yeah.
So,
heads up that this is my interpretation of what was written on the WOC repo, and it is very straw man style. It's very likely that as you read through it, you'll say, oh, that's just not right. And that is absolutely possible.
So let's work together to refine it using the Edgy protocol.
You'll see I made a whole bunch of comments that are long last night on it. So.
Yeah, cool. This feels really good. I feel like this is much easier to drive at. It's like a set thing, and it's, yeah. We have, just as a quick update to everybody else, we did actually ship some code last week. Broke some things, fixed some things, but we're moving, and we will keep moving. Yeah, I'm gonna try and alternate my time between this and the EIS, but I think I have a really clear understanding of how we get to where we need to be, I think, and I just want to make sure, I want to double check that, and then I want to start seeing if we can actually deliver on some of this, because I think this means unity between the working groups, gives archiving working group a concrete deliverable, something to celebrate, and that's exciting.
I did want to, before we hang up, I know we're way over, but quick question, Jason. If I recall correctly, AWS renewed our credits for the year at the same amount as last year, right?
Well, they extended the credits that we received last year, so it's actually minus what we spent out of last year's, to my understanding. But it's still
Okay.
a lot of money.
Right. I mean, we still like dramatically underspent.
Yeah.
So if you want to set up walk stuff in AWS, those are credits that were, originally spec'd based on like the ability to also use it for archiving stuff. And so like you should utilize some of those. Because I think even now at our rate of usage, which we expect to increase, but even then, like we're pretty heavily underspending because we estimated for like double the amount of additional stuff happening that was never used.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think we could just set up a new IAM account for that to happen, and that seems like the way that grant was written up for the renewal. I mean, it totally falls within the use case that was proposed in the grant. So I don't think there'll be any issue at all with that infrastructure living there.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a conversation we need to have because we now have a Kubernetes cluster that's sort of sitting waiting for somebody to take possession of the keys. But I'd actually love to be doing both, and so I don't see why not. We could use the K80s for more distributed webby stuff, and we could use this real things. But yeah, cool. All right,
Yeah.
This is super helpful.
So who's basically if what's the action item on that? I guess are we waiting to hear from you guys on if you need to do discovery on that, or are we minting an account for somebody and sharing some credentials?
Yeah, if we could mint an account and make sure it's shared with a bare minimum, Kelsey and myself, I think that would be the best starting point.
Make a note for myself.
Sorry, an account on what?
AWS.
And then I think the other big action item probably is on me, which is to try and define a like ideal interface between scanner and walk, which I guess I will do as an issue.
Yes, I'm actually gonna open it right now and ping everybody on this call, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. This is very helpful. I think we have a way to move forward.
Okay, guys, I gotta run.
Delightful seeing all of you.
Okay. Dan, did you have something to say? Or are you saying bye?
Just realized I was muted, so it was animatedly saying goodbye. Goodbye.
Everyone.